afternoon. Theresa May is heading to Brussels for last-minute talks ahead of tomorrow's summit, where EU leaders are due to sign two key Brexit documents. She'll meet the European Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker, to finalise the withdrawal agreement, as well as a political declaration on future relations. Well, earlier this morning, the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, defended the deal Mrs May has negotiated, insisting it was the best way to reunite a divided country and protect the economy. But Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party has continued its criticism of the deal and has demanded the Prime Minister abandons it. Well, our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy reports from Belfast, where the DUP conference is taking place, and her report does contain some flashing imagery.
It's the most closely watched conference in the party's history. Northern Ireland's DUP, whose support the government depends on in Parliament, are poised to vote down the draft Brexit deal.
The published withdrawal agreement portrays a pitiful and pathetic place for the United Kingdom. Hundreds of pages devoted to a backstop which would bind the United Kingdom into taking the rules of the European Union with no right to leave and no end date.
Their objections remain with the so-called backstop, the plan to avoid a hard Irish border. And today, the DUP's deputy leader had this message.
So, Prime Minister, the message from this conference, from every section of this party, is bin the backstop.
Top Tories have been in town trying to allay DUP fears. Last night, the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, told us at a private dinner that the backstop may never have to be used. But if it is, say the DUP, Northern Ireland would remain fixed to EU rules, even after the rest of the UK goes its own way. Many Northern Ireland businesses are backing the deal, putting business at odds with the DUP, who say it undermines the integrity of the UK.
Well, I think that's an argument that no one in the business community in Northern Ireland accepts. It's very seldom in Northern Ireland you see unanimity about anything, but when you find that every single business organisation is telling you something different, then I think the DUP should take cognizance of that.
The DUP will continue defending their position here, remaining dug in against that deal. And they're about to be cheered on by another big Brexiteer when Boris Johnson takes to the stage here this afternoon. Emma Vardy, BBC News, Belfast.
The former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson is due to address the conference in the next half hour. Speaking ahead of that, Mr Johnson called on the government and the EU to get rid of the Irish backstop.
The best thing we can do is junk the backstop and get both sides to agree, which they both do agree, that there's no need for a hard border in Northern Ireland. The Commission doesn't want it. All the technical experts say there's no need to have it. And then take that discussion out of the withdrawal agreement and put it for the negotiations that are going to take place over the next couple of years, which is where it belongs. And that is the way forward. Separately, you agree to do a big free trade agreement, and both sides need to do that. And I think what we should also do, in order to encourage progress towards that free trade agreement, we need, as the UK government, to say now that 39 billion, we're not actually handing it over until the end of the talks at the end of 2020, when we will have done that free trade agreement. What we also need to do now is to make sure that we get ready as a country for no deal. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we'll get a very good deal, but it's very important that we really show we're negotiating with confidence and conviction, and have a new Secretary of State with powers across Whitehall to make things happen and get this country ready if we have to go out on WTO terms, which, by the way, I don't think would be nearly as bad as some people suppose.
Boris Johnson speaking earlier there. Well, our Ireland correspondent, Chris Page, is at that DUP conference in Belfast. And Chris, Arlene Foster obviously due to address the conference later this afternoon, and all eyes and ears will be on what she has to say.
That's right, never before has there been so much national attention on the Democratic Unionist Party's annual conference. Arlene Foster will be taking to the podium in the conference hall just round the corner from me here, just after 3 o'clock. And I think, well, firstly what she's going to do is restate her party's bottom lines on Brexit, that they are opposed to the backstop, the fallback arrangements in the draft Brexit deal, because they think that in essence it'll leave Northern Ireland tied more closely to the EU than the rest of the United Kingdom. And they've said that one of their major red lines has always been that the whole of the UK should leave the EU together. Remember, the DUP have always been passionate Brexiteers. Before the rise of UKIP, they were probably the most Eurosceptic party in the UK, so they are all for Brexit, but they say they're not for this particular deal. They want the Prime Minister to go back to the negotiating table and get a better one. So you can certainly expect that to be a major theme in Arlene Foster's speech this afternoon. I also think that she will be looking at the situation more closer to home at Stormont, where there hasn't been a devolved government for almost, there goes Mrs Foster, in fact, just on her way into the conference hall. She's just stepped out of the lift behind me, and she's going in, along with many other party members, to get the best seats in the House, actually, for Boris Johnson's speech. He'll be on just before Mrs Foster, about a 2:30 or so. But as I was saying, Arlene Foster's other main message, I think, besides Brexit, will be the situation around the devolved government in Northern Ireland. Power sharing collapsed almost 2 years ago after the coalition between the DUP and the Irish Republican Party, Sinn Féin, collapsed. So Arlene Foster, I think, will be addressing that situation, restating her party's commitment to getting devolution back up and running, possibly setting out some of the issues which she feels needs to be dealt with in order for that to happen.
And briefly, Chris, we shouldn't forget, should we, that there is support in Northern Ireland for this deal?
Well, that's right. Interestingly, a coalition of business organisations such as the CBI, the Institute of Directors in Northern Ireland, the Federation of Small Businesses, also the main farming union, the Ulster Farmers Union, they've all come out in favour of Theresa May's deal. They went to a reception in Downing Street earlier this week, in which Theresa May personally thanked those of them who had been supporting her. But that hasn't made a difference particularly to the DUP's position. They maintain their right to oppose the backstop, that they're worried about it for economic reasons. They say it'll put more costs on companies in Northern Ireland. They also say they're worried about it from constitutional reasons, that anything that drives a wedge between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, anything that creates an internal barrier, a trade barrier, for example, a regulatory barrier when it comes to rules for the movement of goods, will be a bad thing for the Union, will damage the Union, and the fear is that down the line, in a few years' time, it would mean Northern Ireland would be drifting closer to the EU, closer to the Irish Republic, and away from the United Kingdom. So these are major principles for Unionists, high stakes for Unionists, and I think those will very much be at the heart of Arlene Foster's speech in just over an hour's time. OK,
Chris, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you. Let's go live to Brussels, and our correspondent Gavin Lee is there. And Gavin, just update us, please, on the latest coming from Spain and their objections to this deal.
Yeah, we appear to have a summit underway tomorrow after the 11th hour impasse over Gibraltar between Spain and the EU and the UK, with Pedro Sanchez up until this morning deeply unhappy that Spain wasn't being given a say as it wanted to, that any future decision over Gibraltar, which it disputes as a British overseas territory, will have to go through them and bilaterally with the UK. Now, what's happened is Sir Tim Barrow, the UK's EU permanent representative and ambassador, has sent a letter to the EU Council putting the position hoping to placate the Spanish worries, saying that it's a particular article, basically it's Article 184 of the withdrawal agreement, the divorce agreement, which will be set to be endorsed by the leaders tomorrow. And in it, the EU believe it's fairly anodyne. It talks about the EU and the UK hoping to speed up relations towards a better trade deal after the UK leaves. Now, Spain said, it tacitly suggested that the UK's business was Gibraltar, and they wanted some extra wording put to the text. The problem was Germany and others said the text was signed, they can't have it opened up again. So Sir Tim Barrow in this letter has said basically that this does not affect, this article, the integrity of the territorial scope outside the UK. So we're talking about Gibraltar and other overseas territory. In short, they are saying that we can still discuss this Gibraltar issue bilaterally with Spain in future. That appears to be placating the Spanish Prime Minister, because Donald Tusk, the head of the European Council, who will be the conduit for those talks tomorrow, has said that the summit will take place, and Jean-Claude Juncker, the head of the European Commission, in the past couple of minutes has also said that after dialogue and negotiation with Pedro Sanchez, Spain's Prime Minister, there appears to be the summit set to take place now. So we've moved quite a bit in half an hour, and I think Theresa May, it will be a big relief as she is about to arrive here in the next couple of hours to speak to the EU officials and set the scene and work out the choreography tomorrow. It will be an affair that's not about champagne corks popping, but both sides saying it will be sombre, reflecting the fact that Britain and Theresa May wants to steer the ship in a direction away from the EU after 45 years. OK,
Gavin Lee, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much. Now, we've got some breaking news for you now, and the English director Nicholas Roeg has died at the age of 90. His best-known films include Don't Look Now and The Man Who Fell to Earth, which starred David Bowie. Nick Hyam looks back at his life.
I sent your food back to get it warm.
Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland in Nick Roeg's masterpiece, Don't Look Now.
Stand up.
It was sumptuous and eerie. As in all his films, the images by turns hook you, hypnotise you, unsettle you. He was a cameraman before he was a director. Here he is on the set of Fahrenheit 451, filming Julie Christie for the French director François Truffaut. He was director of photography on Dr. Zhivago, but fell out with the director David Lean, who sacked him. His replacement won an Oscar for work that was partly Roeg's. This adaptation of Far From the Madding Crowd was all his own work, though, and also won awards.
Why don't you go to a hotel?
His first film as director was Performance, starring Mick Jagger as a rock star and James Fox as a gangster.
I remember you in Hemlock Road, 1956.
It included graphic scenes of violence, sex and drug-taking.
Strong, your arm is working perfectly, but there's a part that's not screwed on.
We want to drink. I can't make it any simpler. Water.
He followed it with Walkabout, about two white children lost in the Australian desert. It starred Jenny Agutter, David Gumpelil and Roeg's own son, Luke.
Water!
Gappe.
I don't understand how you can watch them all at the same time.
Tell me.
You know, Tommy, you're really a freak.
The first man in your life?
I don't mean that unkindly.
The Man Who Fell to Earth featured another rock star, David Bowie, in a sprawling, sometimes hallucinogenic work of science fiction.
I really like you.
The trouble is, people get too attached to each other. Things drag on.
Bitte, Sie dürfen nicht weiter.
No, Alex. Stupid. Alex.
Bad Timing, a psychological thriller, featured multiple flashbacks. It starred another musician, Art Garfunkel, and Teresa Russell. Roeg later married her.
That's right.
His version of Roald Dahl's The Witches brought his work to a new generation of children. He made films that were unpredictable and which often made producers and distributors uncomfortable. He could be driven. On one film, crew threatened to walk out when he filmed for 24 hours non-stop.
No, La Barca.
But no other British director could match Nick Roeg's visual imagination or his skill at wrong-footing, bewildering and delighting audiences.
Nick Roeg, who's died at the age of 90. The time is 2:15. Time for those headlines here on BBC News. Theresa May is set to head to Brussels for talks today with top EU officials ahead of Sunday's crucial summit to formally sign off the Brexit deal. French police use a water cannon and tear gas to disperse protesters gathering in central Paris, demanding a cut in the price of fuel. And film director Nicholas Roeg, whose credits include The Man Who Fell to Earth And Don't Look Now has died at the age of 90. Well, as you've just heard there, police in Paris have been using tear gas and water cannon to disperse protesters demonstrating for a second weekend against a planned rise in fuel tax. These are live pictures that we're bringing to you here from the Champs-Élysées, where clashes broke out despite a police security cordon around key sites. Over the past year, the price of diesel has risen by around 23%. Lisa Hamperley reports.
A sea of yellow, the protesters in their trademark high-vis jackets on the Champs-Élysées. The authorities mean business too, using water cannon and tear gas against the thousands of protesters, trying to prevent them moving down to the Palais de la Concorde and the presidential palace, which has been cordoned off. Organisers bill this as Act 2 in their rolling campaign. They're angry about an increase in diesel tax, justified by the government as an anti-pollution levy. But the campaign has grown into a broad opposition against President Emmanuel Macron. Metal worker says, "We feel like we've been working for years now, and it's just extortion, while members of the government live like princes. It's not even possible to live anymore after paying taxes," says this woman. "I'm disgusted. I'm telling you, if I saw him, I wouldn't be able to shake his hand, and I'd tell him exactly what I think." Some here have been ripping up the street and trying to build barricades. But as protesters let off fireworks, the authorities have the power to move them on. Close to 300,000 people protested across France last week. It's estimated that by the end of today, 30,000 will have taken to the streets here in Paris. Lisa Hamperley, BBC News.
Police are questioning a man after an officer was stabbed outside a train station in East London. Police said the male officer was attacked with a knife outside Ilford station last night. The officer's injuries are not thought to be life-threatening. Now, a US government report has warned that climate change will cost America hundreds of billions of dollars and damage human health if no action is taken. President Trump has repeatedly cast doubt on the reality of climate change. Our correspondent, James Cook, has more.
This, say many scientists, is what climate change looks like. In recent years, California has seen bigger, deadlier and more destructive wildfires than ever before. During a cold snap in Washington this week, President Trump tweeted, "Whatever happened to global warming?" Now his own government experts have answered the question. It's here, they say. Its effects are serious, and without dramatic change, they will be catastrophic. Already, says the report, more frequent and intense storms like Hurricane Harvey, which ravaged Houston in Texas, are destroying property and may damage critical infrastructure such as bridges, power plants and oil refineries. Crop yields and labour productivity will decline. There will be a rise in the spread of tropical disease. The poorest Americans will be hardest hit.
One of the things that's quite striking about the report, for example, is that we could see a future where the southeastern parts of the United States experience forest fire seasons that look like what happens in the West right now. And the real harm of a forest fire is not just the conflagration, it's how people, whether they know how to respond to them. They know how to respond to them if they've been through these seasons again and again and again. That's something that people in the Southeast haven't experienced before, so we know that it could potentially have even greater impact.
The scientists say substantial and sustained reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions are essential, and they do report some progress. But President Trump has taken a sharply different approach to his predecessor Barack Obama, championing coal, oil and gas and rolling back environmental regulations. Without major urgent action, says the report, the impacts of climate change will soon cascade into every corner of American life. James Cook, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Hundreds of environmental activists have taken part in a demonstration in Parliament Square in Westminster. As part of the event organised by the group Extinction Rebellion, protesters were urged to wear funeral clothing and bring wreaths to symbolise what campaigners see as the threat to the planet's future. Demonstrations are also taking place at the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh, as well as in Manchester, North Wales and Sheffield. The destruction of the Amazon rainforest in Brazil has reached its highest level in a decade, driven by illegal logging and the planting of crops. Satellite images show that 3,000 square miles of forest was cleared in the year to July, up nearly 14% on the previous year. Environmentalists say deforestation is one of the main causes of global warming. The National Crime Agency has issued a warning to organised gangs, which it says are behind a recent spike in illegal attempts to cross the English Channel. Earlier this morning, the French authorities picked up 5 migrants from a small boat just off the coast, southwest of Calais. On Friday, 8 Iranians were brought ashore after their dinghy was spotted off the coast of Kent. Well, it brings the total number of suspected migrants to have reached the UK this month to 101. Our reporter Keith Doyle has more.
These men were found in a dinghy by a Border Force patrol boat in the Channel yesterday. The 8 men, who say they are Iranian, were taken into custody and interviewed by immigration officers. The day before, 14 people were found in 2 dinghies in the Channel. French authorities found another 11 suspected migrants on the same day. There's been a huge rise in the number of people trying to cross the Channel in small boats. In the past month, 101 suspected migrants have been found, including 9 people found on rocks at Folkestone. 3 boats with 24 suspected migrants, including a toddler, were picked up off Dover and Ramsgate. And 7 men were rescued from a dinghy after making a distress call.
We need to see the Home Office and the French authorities work together to put a stop to this trafficking network. Nearly 100 refugees have been coming across the Channel in recent weeks. It's only a matter of time before there's a tragedy, and that's why the Home Office in particular needs to get a grip and have a plan.
The National Crime Agency says organised crime groups are using these small craft to traffic people, but they're working with the French authorities to stop them. This week, 2 men were jailed for 8 years for smuggling people across the Channel. This is one of the inflatable boats they used. Most people smuggling takes place at ports, but increased security there and the calm weather may be making more people risk their lives by trying to cross the Channel in small, totally unsuitable craft. Keith Doyle, BBC News.
Well, I'm joined now by Chris Hobbs, a former Metropolitan Police Borders officer. Mr. Hobbs, thank you for coming in.
No
Hello.
problem.
First question. We heard there that this month there were 101 migrants who'd managed to cross the Channel. Is that figure really that alarming? The public had always been given this impression that they were much higher.
I think it's just the route they're using, basically. That's what's causing the concern, and the fact that it is a dangerous route as well. And it's obviously something that the network, all networks, have decided to exploit. And you have to wonder why. Do they perceive an inherent weakness on our side of the Channel? Or maybe, and this is a school of thought that may be a little controversial, but are the French perhaps, before the Brexit negotiations are finalised, perhaps standing back a little and not doing all they could to intercept these small boats that are crossing the Channel with some success? So as far as the networks are concerned, at the moment they are being successful, and once they're actually within our 3-mile limit, as it were, then of course they've done it, because if they are Iranian, as they claim, then we won't return them. It's very unlikely they will be returned. So for the networks, it's a very public success which will help them recruit more clients, for want of a better term.
Now, you mentioned there the question of whether there is a weakness on our side. Is there?
Well, we've got 5 customs cutters, only 2 of which are operational, and the Home Office have just purchased 8 inshore vessels. Compared to the French, you've got 40 quite large boats covering a smaller length of coastline. You have to say probably we're not sufficiently covered, and there's been a lot of criticism by the immigration inspector, David Bolt, of the fact we're not particularly well protected along our coastline, in our ports, and we're very vulnerable. And after Brexit, of course, who knows whether we will become more vulnerable, despite the fact that people are saying we will have stronger borders. If you say that to a border force officer, they will probably collapse with laughter.
Yeah, in a minute, when we get to what can be done to address and stop those numbers. But being caught doesn't appear to be a deterrent for those people smugglers. What would be a deterrent?
Well, you have to look at the humanitarian situation. The deterrent probably will be to lock them up, to put them in detention centres. Now, we haven't got room in our detention centres, and of course there will be cries that this is being very, very inhumane to those people who've had a very, very difficult journey and may be genuinely trying to escape persecution. So it's really hard to say, unless we are really prepared to punish the migrants, then that isn't going to be much of a deterrent. A real deterrent, of course, will be locking up those smuggling networks, the people behind the organisation. But there has been some success recently with the crime agency and the French police. People have been arrested on the French side and on our side. But generally speaking, the networks have pretty much their own way, which is not the situation we'd like to see. And that route to Calais, is there any effort in terms of taking action to stop them reaching there, that route across land until they get to the port of Calais? Well, they've got pretty much a free rein once they're actually inside the Schengen area. And they'll come through maybe Turkey, Romania, Bulgaria, but once they're inside the Schengen area, of course there's no borders, probably very, very few checks. And the problem with Calais, that now is relatively secure. It's still people being smuggled through there, but now of course the smugglers are looking elsewhere for weak spots along the coast, and they're finding them. Okay. Thank you very much, Chris Hobbs. No problem. Now, hundreds of people have attended the funeral of the well-known Syrian radio host and activist Riyad Fares, who was killed by gunmen in the rebel-held province of Idlib. Mr. Fares founded an independent radio station broadcasting from opposition-held areas. Now, despite several assassination attempts, he refused to leave Idlib and continued to defy both the government and militants. When Fresh Radio was ordered to remove its female presenters, he used software to disguise their voices. Well, tributes to Mr. Fares have been paid from across the world. A new nasal swab test for flu, which can give a diagnosis in just 20 minutes, has helped to significantly reduce bed blocking and unnecessary admissions in hospitals. It was used in trials at 2 hospital trusts in Norwich and South London, and avoids the need to put patients in isolation. Other flu tests can take several days and to return results. Now, the search is on for missing footage of Sir David Attenborough, first aired on the BBC almost 50 years ago. Staff at the Royal Institution are asking the public to look in their attics for any recordings of their Christmas science lectures, including those by Sir David, after realising that 31 broadcasts are missing from their collection. Our media and arts correspondent, David Silito, reports.
We will have a little protein dance. Okay?
Carl Sagan in 1977 doing the protein dance.
Very good. Can you get a different note on it?
Christopher Zeman and the science of music.
Heart rate 126. You must be calming down, Robert. How do you feel now compared to before? Great.
These lectures have been a Christmas tradition since 1825 and were first broadcast on the BBC in 1936, but not all of them have survived in the archive. Some of David Attenborough's lectures from 1973 have gone missing. There are also gaps in 66, 67, 69, 70 and 71. The Royal Institution wants to put all of these televised lectures online and is asking the public if they have copies of the missing programmes hidden in a loft or stored in a garage. They were television's first ever science programme, and they're hoping that some of their technologically inclined viewers might be able to help them complete the full collection. David Silito, BBC News.
Here's a question. I wonder if you recognise this sound. Of course you do. That is undeniably The Lion King, but not as we know it, as far as the pictures go anyway. Now, the trailer for the retelling of the classic Disney film has been released, and it's already had 21 million views in just 24 hours. Now, the remake is due to hit cinemas next summer, and its cast includes the likes of Beyoncé, Seth Rogen, and Donald Glover, otherwise known as Childish Gambino. OK, now it's time for a look at the weather. Here's Nick Miller.
Hi there, good afternoon. A lot of cloud coming in across the east and south of the UK today. It's an easterly flow yet again. It's all changed though in the week ahead, as we'll see in a moment. But right now it's as you were with that easterly breeze. Temperatures for the most part in single figures. Showers into eastern Scotland, northeast England. Outbreaks of rain, southern England into South Wales. As we go on through tonight, still a few showers running along southern coastal England. Maybe some into the far southeast as well. Eastern Scotland, northeast England. Elsewhere it's variable cloud, it's clear spells. And temperatures dropping into low single figures and close to freezing under the clearer skies. Parts of northwest England, Northern Ireland and western Scotland may just see a touch of frost here and there. It's more of the same tomorrow. Still some showers running into eastern Scotland, northeast England. I think some will drift further west on a stronger wind across rest of southern Scotland into parts of northern.
Hello and welcome to Witness with me, Razia Iqbal. I'm here at the British Library with 5 extraordinary moments in history told to us by people who were there. Coming up, we find out about a ship that left 4,000 tons of hazardous waste on a beach in Haiti. A rather unusual car designed for disabled war veterans. We'll remember Robert Graves, a British poet scarred by the First World War. And we speak to the man who invented the game of paintball. But we start with a story of Rupan Deol Bajaj, who became the first woman in India to successfully bring a case of sexual harassment to court. It was an extraordinary legal battle that lasted for 17 years.
She may be working class, she may be an officer, she may be high-ranking officer like me. All women. Nobody's immune. And it happens every day. In 1988, I was serving as Special Secretary Finance. I had about 20,000 people under me. 90% were men. There was a dinner party hosted by the Home Secretary and Mr. KPS Gill, who was the Director General of Police, was also there. He called out to me and he said, Mrs. Bajaj, I want to talk to you about something. He got up and he came and stood in front of me, towering above me. He put the finger in my face like that and he said, up. Come on, up, come along with me. Come on, you come along with me. So I said, Mr. Gill, go away from here. You're misbehaving. And I got out from the gap in between him and me. And when I was going, that is the time when he slapped me on the bottom. That's what he did. Always people have considered it to be a very trivial thing, but I could not get over the enormity of it. Letting it go meant living with a lowered self-esteem, gulping down my humiliation, facing that person every day, facing all the other people. Consequences of complaining, I had not really estimated at that time. Nobody was willing to take up the case for me because they were so frightened of the DGP. He was the highest ranking police officer with all the powers of life and death. No one wanted to do anything against him. And I found that no one had ever filed in section 509 and 354, which is the lesser offences against the modesty of women. 17 years, long years of my life. All of it was taken up by this one case. The lower courts had quashed the case, they had thrown it out. The case reached the Supreme Court, and it was the Supreme Court which called for all the records, reinstated the matter, and also laid down, they gave the definition of modesty. They reprimanded the High Court judge and said, this cannot be treated as something trivial. All the people in every household, this was the talk between husband and wife. The limelight was not on KPS Gill. The entire focus was on me. Why have I registered a case? Must be something wrong with me. I attended the proceedings of the trial throughout, along with my husband. But on the day the verdict came, I specially requested, I said, I don't want to go there. KPS Gill was expecting to win, so they had the police band there. And then my husband's driver rang up and said, "Madam, he has been convicted on both counts." It's the mindset I fought against. I never fought against KPS Gill. I fought against the mindset of a society. People have started saying now offences against women are increasing. They're increasing. No. Now more women are speaking up.
Rupan Diol Bajaj on her fight against harassment in India. Now the story of an environmental scandal. In 1988, a ship dumped 4,000 tons of American waste on a beach in Haiti and then sailed away. Kenny Bruno was one of the environmentalists who tried to bring the incident to the world's attention.
I find it outrageous, even now, 30 years later, to think that it was just dumped out in the open, uncovered, not fenced in, no security, no protections, no signs even. This is incinerator ash that has hazardous constituents. It's a hazardous waste. And if you just dump it in another country without any environmental regulations, you're dumping your problem on somebody else. The Cayenne Sea left Philadelphia on September 5th, 1986, and it was carrying 14,000 tons of incinerator ash from the Philadelphia Municipal Incinerator. At the time, it was routine to take this incinerator ash to landfills in the United States, but those landfills were filling up, especially on the East Coast, so it started looking for other places to dump. Well, the Cayenne Sea was out for about 2 years with its cargo, and it went all over the world, pretty much. It wasn't especially easy to track the ship, but we had a lot of contacts in other countries, and people would give us information. It went to the Bahamas, it went to the Dominican Republic, it went to Honduras. It was turned away by quite a few landfills and quite a few countries. And it even went to Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau in West Africa before coming all the way back to Haiti, where it landed on December 31st, 1987. It unloaded 4,000 tons of the ash out of the 14,000 tons on board in Gonaïves, which is about 3 hours drive north of Port-au-Prince, the capital.
We don't want to hide anything. We want to be very open to everyone.
While the Cayenne Sea was still in Gonaïves, offloading its cargo, one of the crew members came out and spoke with the local people and was filmed by the local environmental group.
This is how worried I am of its toxicity. That's how worried I am of the toxicity.
The incinerator ash had been marked as fertilizer. We had been told that. So for all we knew, there were government officials that would not welcome our visit. So we were a bit nervous about going there in the first place. We were able to just drive up nearby and then walk right up to the ash. Nobody interfered with us. Nobody said anything.
This is a sample of the ash that came from Philadelphia, and we're going to test for heavy metals like lead, mercury, cadmium, and also for organic chemicals like dioxins, benzenes, chloroform, and so forth.
We took samples of the ash and sent them to the Exeter laboratory in the UK, and they found levels of lead and cadmium especially that would qualify that ash as hazardous waste. It took 12 years to get the ash sent back to the United States. It took so long because no one stepped up to take responsibility. Not the company, not the city of Philadelphia, nor the state of Pennsylvania, not the US government. Nobody wanted to take responsibility. They preferred to just leave it sitting in Haiti. What's been important about it was how blatant the injustice was and how we were able to stop a trend that was developing of dumping hazardous waste in the developing world. So some good came out of this event.
Environmentalist Kenny Bruno. It is 100 years since the end of the First World War, and our next film is about the writer and poet Robert Graves, who fought in the conflict. He was both physically and emotionally scarred by his experiences. His son, William Graves, spoke to Witness about his father and how he was changed by the war.
He'd never really recovered. I don't think anyone recovered from that war.
Grey, haunted eyes, absent-mindedly glaring from wide, uneven orbits.
He sort of sat me on his knee as a 4 or 5 years old. And one of the things he used to do is said, "Feel here," and he had a lump above his brow, which was actually a piece of granite.
One brow drooping somewhat over the eye, because of a missile fragment still in hearing, skin deep, as a foolish record of old world fighting.
In July 1916, which is the date of the Battle of the Somme, he takes a walk into the wood, actually looking for overcoats and things like that for winter, for his men. And he comes across this dead German, pretty gory sight. A poem came along shortly afterwards in which he describes this. To you who'd read my songs of war and only hear of blood and fame, I'll say, you've heard it said before, war's hell. And if you doubt the same, today I found in Mamet's Wood a certain cure for lust of blood, where, propped against a shattered trunk in a great mess of things unclean, sat a dead Boche. He scowled and stunk, with clothes and face of sodden green, big-bellied, spectacled, cropped-haired, dripping black blood from nose and beard. You know, he suffered from shell shock. He had certainly nightmares until at least 10 years after. One of the things he found very hard to accept was this idea of joyfulness at the end of the war.
When the days of rejoicing are over, when the flags are stowed safely away, they will dream of another wild war to end wars, and another wild armistice day. But the boys who are killed in the trenches, who fought with no rage and no rant, we left them stretched out on their pellets of mud, low down with the worm and the ant.
Here in Mallorca, he could very much live his own life. In those terms, I think it was good for him. He could really concentrate here on what he really loved doing, which was writing. When we used to go down to the beach, I remember, and of course he also carried with him his army knapsack and his water bottle. But certainly he didn't have to talk with anyone else. He had very few people he could relate to here. He was always working. Towards the end of his life, the war started coming back to him.
I don't dream, but I got a very strong mental picture of it. I can see the whole thing as vividly as I can in this room.
When he was in a wheelchair and we'd wheel him and there was a big bang or something, and he'd sort of always jump if something was going on. He'd almost point a gun at you. It was a very strange end of a life. But at the very end, he was sitting in a chair and just sighed, and that was it. He died very peacefully here.
William Graves, remembering his father, Robert. Remember, you can watch Witness every month on the BBC News Channel, or you can catch up on all our films, along with more than 1,000 radio programmes in our online archive. Just go to bbc.co.uk/witness. After the Second World War, three-wheeled cars were offered to disabled people in the UK to help with mobility. But it wasn't long before the vehicles, known by the brand name Invacar, drew criticism. One former owner, Colin Powell, explains how the Invacar came about and why they were so unpopular.
very much a result of the war veterans coming back disabled from the Second World War. It became apparent to the government that they needed some form of transportation.
All have motor invalid chairs, and many go out in them every day to work in nearby factories along the Great West Road.
The government came up with designing what we best described in those days as being an invalid carriage. But then they got the brand name, which was the brand name of the manufacturer. They become the Inva car. All were hand controls. In other words, if you take the 3 pedals that are in a normal vehicle, the clutch, the accelerator and the foot brake, they were all incorporated to be only operated by the hands. I'm a victim of polio and have always suffered from restricted mobility. I was 16 when I first got my invalid carriage. The excitement of this vehicle coming into your possession after years of being dependent on, in my case, my parents, to take me anywhere, was an absolute delight and thrill. It gave you the feeling of somehow levelling out the playing field of the limitations put upon you by your disability. It took me to college when I was a student. It took me to my first job. But when we look at it objectively, we can see a lot that wasn't right with it as well.
85% of disabled people using this vehicle are said to have complained about its unpredictable behaviour on the road.
They were not reliable, they were unstable, they were fundamentally unsafe. The fact that it was a single seater meant in your formative teenage and 20s years, it was a very antisocial method of transport because, you know, when you started to form friendships with girls and what have you, I was a bit of a rebel, and I can't say with my hand on my heart that I didn't sneak a young lady in my car on more than one occasion. Well, she'd sit where the wheelchair should sit, on the floor, very uncomfortable, totally no padding, no seatbelt, totally unsafe.
The campaign to get invalids onto 4 wheels instead of 3 switched in October to Tower Bridge.
I did take part in a protest against these vehicles where we were looking for the government to consider issuing a regular, adapted, ordinary cars. And eventually the protest got so heated that the government allowed this scheme to allow the provision of a regular car adapted for the disabled person.
This Triumph Spitfire is the first sports car to be converted and cost £115 to switch to hand operation.
Most things you find in the disability world, they're never designed by a disabled person. They'll be decided by someone who thinks they know what a disabled person needs. I might be disabled, but I'm a human being. I'm as normal as anyone else. It's just that I have additional challenges in my life, as the mass market for motoring could have easily accommodated them from day one.
Colin Powell's memories. In 2003, the government scrapped Invacars and the few that remain are in private hands. And finally, the strange story about the origin of the popular game that is paintball. It all began in the early 1980s when a young man, Charles Gaines, tried to settle a long-standing argument with one of his friends.
Paintball originated with an argument between myself and my best friend, Hayes Knoll. Hayes was a very successful stock trader on the New York Stock Exchange. He believed that the capacity to survive and to do well is an inherent, inborn talent. He would argue he could be a survivor anywhere. I spent my life in the woods, hunting and fishing. I argued, on the other hand, that survival is more a function of learning certain behavioral tactics to get by, and that they are environmentally specific. And I said to Hayes, if you came up to New Hampshire and went out in the woods with me, you wouldn't have a chance. A friend of mine sent me a catalog that had in it a pistol, and it shot a little ball of paint about this big around, And it was used by foresters to mark trees to be cut down and so forth. And I had one of those eureka moments. Two things come together. I called Hayes up and I said, I figured out how we're going to prove this argument one way or another. So I ordered 2 of these guns and a bunch of the pellets, and Hayes came up to my house. We decided we'd test these guns out because as far as we'd known, nobody had ever shot a person with them. Hayes shot first and he missed, and I shot him right in the butt. And it hurt. So then what we did, we went out into 40 acres of woods, and Hayes went in one end, I went in the other, and we hunted each other. Within about 20 minutes, I came around a big maple tree, and Hayes was sitting on a rock, and I walked right up behind him and put the barrel of the gun right on his neck and said, all right, I don't want to shoot you, who wins? We had so much fun doing this that we decided we didn't want to just drop it there, that what we would do, we'd invite 10 other people who had demonstrable survival capacity, who had distinguished themselves by succeeding in whatever chosen line of work they'd gone into, more than normally. The first official game of paintball was played in June of 1981. The original game required 4 flag stations, and those flag stations were marked on a topographic map that each competitor was given, along with a gun. I think we gave him 10 pellets, a pair of goggles, a compass, and this map. So that game rewarded stealth, wood skills, strategy. We started up a company called the National Survival Game. It set up franchises. And what we quickly found out was that what people wanted to do was shoot. We had fields all over the country. The idea of running through the woods, competing, and in a way sort of symbolically surviving, those go way back into, our genetic development.